All right, welcome in everyone for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at MCDP 10,
MCDP 10.
which is Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 10.
It is.
And as always, we're going to be breaking down some really dense material, kind of picking out some of the key concepts.
Yeah, this is a fun one.
And this one is specifically for the Marines out there.
Absolutely.
So hopefully this is going to be helpful for you guys as you're going through your training.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is the foundational document that's sort of underpins the way that the Marine Corps thinks about itself and operates
Yeah, I mean, I think the big takeaway
in the modern world.
that I get from this is just how flexible the Marine Corps is designed to be.
Yeah.
They talk about, not just reacting to crises, but being able to prevent them in the first place.
Right. And that's, I think, one of the really fascinating things
Yeah.
about this doctrine is that it's not just about brute force, right? It's about being smart about it. It's about understanding kind of the broader context of geopolitics
Yeah.
and how your actions as a Marine, fit into this larger picture of global security.
And that concept of, persistent presence without permanence.
Right.
Being able to deploy rapidly and, demonstrate commitment without necessarily, establishing a permanent base somewhere.
Right. And that's something that, General Colin Powell even talked about back in 1990.
Yeah.
Sometimes just having those ships out there
Mm-hmm.
and having those Marines, forward deployed
The presence.
can be enough to deter a conflict from even beginning.
Exactly. And that's, that presence combined with the ability to cooperate with partners.
Right.
And just, that relationship building that they talk about, that's,
Yeah.
Really the backbone of this deterrence.
So you're not just like the tough guys.
Right.
You're not just like the, the fist.
Right.
You're also the diplomats in a way.
You're the whole package,
Yeah.
And that brings us to, this whole idea of military engagement, security, cooperation, and deterrence.
Right. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Right.
What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so what it means is you're going to be working with international partners, other government agencies, even civilian authorities,
Right.
and sharing information, coordinating efforts, to tackle security challenges as a team.
So it could be anything from training foreign military forces to
Yeah.
providing humanitarian aid after a natural disaster.
Yeah, and Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Downey, in Imperial Grunts, he talked about how,
Right.
the presence of Marines in a certain area, it allowed NGOs and civilian doctors to operate safely.
Right.
And without that stability, those vital services just wouldn't be possible.
And that's a really good example of how even those actions that aren't directly related to combat
Yeah.
can still have a really positive impact
Right.
on the security and stability of an entire region.
No. Yeah, it all folds into this idea of deterrence, and when potential adversaries see the U.S. working closely with partners deploying these capable forces and demonstrating a commitment to security,
Right.
they're less likely to take those aggressive actions.
So it's like you're playing, 4D chess or something.
It is, yeah.
Every single move you make is having all of these, cascading impacts.
It is a very strategic document, and it encourages this idea of, thinking several steps ahead and understanding the long-term impact of the actions that Marines are taking.
Okay, so we've got this foundation now
Right.
of engagement, cooperation, and deterrence.
Yes.
But this document goes deeper, right?
It
It
does.
talks about
Yeah.
specific types of operations.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, think about it almost as a toolkit.
Okay.
You've got nation assistance, you've got maritime security operations, you've got combating terrorism.
So these are the tools that you can use.
So force operations, the list goes on and on. It's incredible.
Okay, so let's get into some of those specific tools.
Yeah, let's break it down.
And talk about what they actually mean, for the Marine on the ground.
Yeah.
So starting with nation assistance, what does that actually entail?
So nation assistance is all about helping partner nations build capacity and stability.
Okay.
It can involve humanitarian and civic assistance after a disaster, supporting those security assistance programs, training foreign military forces.
So let's say, you're deployed to a partner nation and there's been a devastating earthquake or something.
Right.
You might be involved in, providing medical aid,
Yeah, absolutely true.
distributing supplies, rebuilding infrastructure.
And working alongside, their military,
Right.
sharing expertise to help them improve their own capabilities.
And so you're not just, the war fighter, right?
Yeah.
You're also, the helping hand in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And this kind of partnership builds trust and strengthens relationships, making it less likely that conflicts will erupt in the future.
So it's a huge responsibility,
It is.
but it's also, you know, a really incredible opportunity, I think,
Yeah,
to make a real difference in people's lives.
absolutely.
Now, what about maritime security operations?
Yeah, yes.
So this is all about the sea, I imagine.
This is all about the sea. So maritime security is crucial for, protecting sovereignty, securing vital resources, ensuring freedom of navigation.
Okay.
It's about countering threats like piracy,
Right.
drug trafficking, illegal immigration, anything that could disrupt global trade and stability.
Give me a real-world example.
Ah, so many to choose from.
Yeah.
Well, how about the recapture of the MV Magellan Star from Somali pirates back in 2010?
Oh, yeah.
Elements of the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, conducted this daring boarding operation,
Right.
freed the ship and its crew. It's a textbook example of maritime security in action.
So that's like straight out of an action movie.
It really is.
You know?
High stakes.
And that just shows like the range of things that you might be doing.
Yeah.
As a Marine, like you could be boarding a hostile vessel one day
Mm-hmm.
and then, providing security for humanitarian aid delivery the next.
Yeah, it's a dynamic and challenging environment that requires Marines to be adaptable,
Right.
quick thinking, able to work seamlessly with other maritime forces.
All right, so we've talked about helping partner nations and securing the seas.
Right.
Now let's talk about combating terrorism.
Yeah, yes.
So this is obviously a major focus, these days.
It is.
How does this document address that?
So combating terrorism encompasses both anti-terrorism, which is defensive in nature, and counterterrorism, which focuses on offensive operations.
Okay.
Marines might be involved in protecting key infrastructure from attack, conducting raids against terrorist networks, or supporting partner forces in their own counterterrorism efforts.
So it could be anything from, force protection and intelligence gathering
Yeah.
to like, high-stakes direct action missions against terrorist groups.
And it all requires this deep understanding of, the enemy, the environment, the complex political landscape.
Okay, so we're starting to get a sense of, how many different things you might be doing
Yeah.
as a Marine.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to show of force operations.
Show force. Okay.
What's the strategy behind those?
So show of force operations are a way of demonstrating U.S. resolve and deterring potential adversaries.
Okay.
It's about sending that clear message, don't even think about messing with us.
Right.
It's a powerful form of non-kinetic action.
So I imagine this involves like, deploying a powerful force to a strategic location,
Yeah,
conducting exercises,
absolutely.
and just generally making it clear that you're ready and willing to fight if necessary.
Exactly. And a classic example of this is Operation Imminent Thunder in 1990.
Right.
Before the first Gulf War kicked off, the U.S. deployed this massive amphibious course to the Arabian Gulf. And, it was a clear signal to Saddam Hussein that the international community was serious about forcing his withdrawal from Kuwait.
And it's fascinating how, a purely military maneuver like that can have such a huge political impact.
It can.
Right.
And that's a key takeaway from this document. It's not just about brute force.
Right.
It's about understanding that strategic context and leveraging all available tools, kinetic and non-kinetic,
Right. Yeah.
to achieve national objectives.
Okay, so let's pause here for a second.
Yeah.
And think about what we've learned so far.
Yeah.
What stands out to you?
Well, it's pretty clear that the Marine Corps plays a vital role in shaping this global security environment.
Right.
And you're not just fighting wars, you're preventing them.
Right.
And that takes many forms, from humanitarian aid to counterterrorism, from training allies to projecting this credible deterrent force.
It's a big responsibility.
It is.
But it's also, a really incredible opportunity, I think,
It is.
to have a real impact on the world.
Yeah,
All right, so are you ready to delve into some more of these specific operations?
I am. Bring it on. Let's keep going.
Okay, we've got arms control sanctions, enforcement protection of shipping, and a few more fascinating areas to explore.
Excellent.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It does.
So let's jump right back in.
All right, let's do it. All right, so let's jump into arms control.
Okay.
An area that might not seem as action-packed as some of the others, but it's absolutely vital for maintaining global stability.
Right. So what does that actually look like, for a Marine on the ground?
It can involve a range of tasks, from verifying international arms agreements to physically securing or even destroying weapons.
Okay.
Imagine inspecting facilities, monitoring compliance with treaties, making sure that dangerous materials don't fall into the wrong hands.
Right. So you might be like working alongside international inspectors or like
Yeah.
securing a weapons cache or something like that.
Absolutely. It's a behind-the-scenes role, but it's crucial for creating a safer world.
Right.
And it requires a deep understanding of international agreements and a meticulous approach.
Now, sanctions enforcement and maritime interception operations, those sound a little bit more like what you might picture
Yeah.
when you think of Marines in action.
You could say that. So
Yeah.
these operations are all about enforcing international sanctions against rogue states or groups.
Okay.
Often involves intercepting ships on the high seas,
Right.
inspecting their cargo, and making sure they're not transporting prohibited goods.
And so I can picture, Marines boarding a vessel,
Yeah.
searching for contraband, detaining individuals involved in these illicit activities.
It's a high-stakes game of cat and mouse out there on the open ocean.
Right.
A historical example that comes to mind is the maritime interception operations conducted against Iraq in the 1990s.
Okay.
Naval forces, including Marines, worked together to enforce UN sanctions and prevent Saddam Hussein's regime from acquiring weapons or exporting oil illegally.
Right. So it was a really long and complex
A
operation
long one.
requiring, a lot of persistence and a commitment to upholding international law.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about protection of shipping.
Okay.
So I imagine this is pretty straightforward.
This one is pretty straightforward. It's about safeguarding U.S. vessels, citizens, and property at sea
Oh,
from threats like piracy, terrorism, or even hostile state action.
so you might be, deployed on a ship,
Yeah,
providing security,
absolutely.
escorting a convoy through dangerous waters, or even responding to a hijacking incident.
Think back to Operation Praying Mantis in 1988.
Okay.
A special-purpose Marine Air-Ground Task Force operating from the USS Trenton took decisive action to protect shipping in the Arabian Gulf from Iranian attacks.
So the range of potential threats out there is pretty vast.
It is a reminder that the world's oceans aren't always peaceful.
Right now, what about freedom of navigation and overflight operations?
So these operations are all about asserting the right to navigate international waters and airspace without interference. It's about challenging unlawful claims and ensuring that vital sea lanes and air routes remain open for everyone.
Right, and this is like a fundamental principle of international law, right?
It is a fundamental principle.
And you remember reading about Operation Attain document,
Yeah.
where Marine electronic warfare aircraft participated in freedom of navigation operations against Libya in the Gulf of Sidra.
That was a clear demonstration that the U.S. won't tolerate attempts to restrict its movement on the high seas
Right.
or in international airspace.
Now let's talk about defense support to public diplomacy.
Ah, yes.
So this sounds like a more subtle form of influence.
It is a subtle form. Think about providing security for a presidential visit overseas, showcasing Marine capabilities during a goodwill tour,
Okay.
or even participating in cultural exchanges with partner nations.
I remember when the USS Palelio Amphibious Ready Group and the 15th MEU provided support to the U.S. Secret Service during President Obama's visit to India in 2010.
Great example of how the military can play a vital role in supporting diplomacy and strengthening alliances.
Right. It's all about, building those positive relationships around the world.
It is.
So it seems like there's a real theme here of, the Marine Corps being this versatile force
There is.
that can, operate in all these different domains.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, often working with other partners to achieve national objectives.
It's all about that teamwork.
Okay, let's talk about exclusion zones enforcement.
All right.
What's the purpose of those?
So exclusion zones are specific geographic areas where certain activities are prohibited,
Okay.
often established to prevent conflict or protect civilians during a crisis.
Right.
Marines might be tasked with enforcing these zones using a combination of air and sea power to monitor compliance and deter violations.
So Operation Southern Watch and Deny Flight come to mind,
Yes.
where Marines played a key role in enforcing no-fly zones over Iraq and Bosnia.
Exactly. It's a way of using military force to create a safe haven or prevent further escalation of a conflict.
Now, what about Department of Defense support to counter-drug operations?
All right, so the illegal drug trade is a global scourge that fuels violence, instability, and corruption.
Right.
The Department of Defense supports law enforcement agencies in their efforts to combat this threat.
Okay.
And Marines often play a crucial role in those efforts.
So I imagine, providing surveillance and intelligence support,
Yeah.
conducting interdiction operations, assisting with the destruction of drug labs or smuggling routes.
Think about the ongoing efforts of Joint Task Force North along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Sure.
Marines routinely provide support to this task force,
Right.
helping to disrupt the flow of drugs into the United States.
So it's a reminder that the fight against drugs is not just a domestic issue. It's a global
No.
challenge that
Yeah.
requires, an international response.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to a little bit more of a complex topic here.
Okay.
Support to insurgency.
Support to insurgency.
So what does that actually involve?
So it involves providing assistance to groups fighting against oppressive regimes or occupying forces.
Yeah.
This support can range from providing training and equipment to conducting covert operations and providing logistical support.
So a classic example would be, the support provided to the Mujahideen resistance in Afghanistan
Yeah,
during the Soviet occupation in the 1980s,
good example.
where the U.S. provided training and logistical support to those fighters.
It underscores the fact that the Marine Corps can be called upon to support unconventional warfare efforts,
Right.
often in highly sensitive and politically charged environments.
So we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
from providing humanitarian aid to combating terrorism,
Yeah,
enforcing sanctions to supporting insurgencies.
a lot of ground.
It's clear that, the modern Marine Corps is incredibly versatile,
It is.
and, capable of taking on this wide range of missions.
Absolutely. And what's key here is that this document doesn't just list these operations. It emphasizes the underlying principles that guide them.
Right.
It's about understanding the strategic context, building partnerships, and using all available tools, kinetic and non-kinetic,
Right.
to achieve those national objectives.
So it's not just about, following orders.
It's not.
It's about understanding the why behind the what
Absolutely.
and being able to, adapt to this ever-changing security environment.
It is. And it really is a complex environment out there. And what does all this really mean for you, Marine?
Well, it means being ready for anything, right?
Yeah, you got to be adaptable, you got to be really proficient in your core skills and able to work as part of a team, no matter what the mission is.
So you're like that jack of all trades, ready to tackle anything, whether it's providing aid or counterterrorism or high-intensity combat. It's about being that flexible, adaptable force that MCDP 10 talks about.
And here's a really important point from MCDP 10. Your actions matter, even if they seem small. They have this ripple effect on the global security environment.
Like how so?
Well, think about it. Whether you're providing security for a diplomatic mission, or you're training a partner nation's forces, or you're conducting a boarding operation at sea, it all adds up. You're contributing to something much bigger than yourself.
So it's about being part of this global team.
Right. It's a team that's working to make the world more stable and secure.
And that's a pretty heavy responsibility.
It is, but it's also an incredible opportunity to make a real difference. It's not something everyone gets to do.
Absolutely.
And that's why this document, MCDP 10, really stresses professional development, continuous learning, critical thinking. It's not just about following orders.
You've got to understand the why behind the what.
Exactly. And you
Yeah.
got to be able to think on your feet to adapt and make good decisions when things get tough.
So it's not just some, dry document.
Well, I don't know.
It's really a guide to how to operate in this really complex world.
It is. And that leads to a question for you to think about, Marine. How will you apply what you've learned from MCDP 10 in your career? What kind of leader will you be?
What kind of impact do you want to have?
Exactly. Think about the contributions you want to make to the mission. These are really important things to think about as you move forward.
Yeah, so it's about taking those principles of adaptability, partnership, understanding that strategic context, and making sure they're not just words on a page.
Right. You got to live them.
You got to embody them in everything you do.
Exactly. And remember, MCDP 10, this is a living document. It's going to keep evolving. The world changes, the threats change.
Warfare's changing all the time.
So you got to stay informed, stay engaged, and always be ready to adapt, whatever challenges come your way.
Well, Maureen, I think that wraps up our deep dive into MCDP 10. We've covered a lot of ground, from those big strategic ideas to those very specific missions that you might be called upon to do.
Yeah, we've really gone deep.
Hopefully you've got a much better understanding of how this doctrine really shapes your role in the world.
Being a Marine, it's not just a job. It's something bigger.
It's a calling.
It demands the best of you. Physically, mentally, morally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So embrace those challenges. Seek out those opportunities for growth. Never stop learning.
The world needs Marines like you, now more than ever. Semper Fidelis.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.